Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this session here at yeurDreamin 2025. It is great to be here with you all. It's great to be back at yeurDreamin. It's the first time I've been back in a couple of years, as yeurDreamin didn't happen last year in 2024, but it's great to be back. Right off the top of the bat, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsors for today's conference. Without them, today wouldn't be able to happen. So we just want to say a big thank you to our sponsors for the conference this year. This session is Integrate Slack lists with Salesforce Tasks through the power of automation. My name is Mark Jones. I am a Salesforce consultant and evangelist working out of Time Technology. We're a Salesforce partner in the UK focused on the nonprofit space. And right off at the top of the session, I do want to put a little caveat in here just about the fact that this session does use Slack workflows. So if this integration that we're going to be demoing, if you are not on a paid plan for Slack, you will not be able to use some of this functionality because of the fact that workflows are part of the paid plan for Slack. So I do want to put that out there quite early on so that you're all aware. Just a little bit about me, though, so you know who I am if you haven't met me before. As I said, my name is Mark, and I'm a Salesforce consultant from the UK. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem since 2016, and I'm a 10-time certified Salesforce professional, and I'm very much active in the community as a community group leader and as a conference speaker as well, and have had the chance to speak at Dreamforce and Trailblazer DX in both 2023 and 2024, respectively. And for the purpose of this session, one of the things that it's worth knowing about myself is that I am a diagnosed flow fanatic, and I have a blog called The Flow Architect, which has content on there about flow. And I am looking to post more blog posts on the Flow Architect over the course of 2025. So that's a little bit about me. Let's now talk about briefly before we go into what the integration is and how it works. Let's talk about the Q&A. I did want to mention this early on, but because of the way that the sessions are working this year, I do have a QR code at the end of my slides, which you'll be able to scan the image of and get access to a spreadsheet with a list of resources for today's session on there. One of the resources in there is a Google form, which allow you to submit questions. And what my plan is sometime over the next few weeks, I'll see how we do on the question side. Is to post, if we get any questions, is to post a blog on LinkedIn using my Ragamuffin admin handle, which will go through those questions and give those answers. So on that form, there will be some questions asked just in terms of asking, can I tag you in that blog, just to say, that you've asked the question. And if you are happy for me to tag you in that, it will ask you to provide me with the URL for you on LinkedIn, just so I can ensure I'm tagging the right person on that. But the form won't be hugely time consuming or anything. It'll just be basically, what's your name? Are you happy for me to tag you on the post on LinkedIn? And if so, can I have your LinkedIn URL? And then what is your question? So it won't be a huge form at all, but it'll give you an opportunity to ask questions, and it'll give me also the ability to go and answer those questions and respect the question that you submit as well. Now let's talk about what we're covering in today's session. So today I'm focusing on an integration between Slack lists and Salesforce tasks on there. And just to go into kind of why the genesis of this idea, one of the things that often happens at these conferences is you'll be asked, what's the use case for the idea? And for this one, honestly, I didn't actually have one. And that might sound a little strange, but here's the reason why. When Salesforce purchased, I've been using Slack um, for different things before Salesforce had purchased it. And back in 2021, it would have been. Yes, 2021, the purchase would have been. Feels like a long time ago now. I'd been using it before then, but when Salesforce purchased Slack and then started releasing the Slack for Salesforce app with the integration with Flow via the Slack Actions, I was probably one of the first people in the community, if not maybe the first. I don't honestly know, but I was probably certainly one of the first people to actually start talking about this in the community and to start experimenting with it on there. And that led to the Dreamforce session I mentioned. And I've spoken about Slack integrations at other conferences, such as North African Dreaming and more recently French Touch Dreaming as well. So I've been doing in around this area of kind of interest in how Salesforce and Slack play together for a number of years. And the company that I work for, I mentioned I work for a consulting partner that focused on the nonprofit space. They had expressed interest in potentially doing some Slack implementations. So those two things combined, I started trying to think of, well, what kind of thing might a nonprofit customer come to us with if we do a Slack implementation? Go, can we do this? And the first thing that came to my head logically was, well, can we integrate Salesforce tasks and Slack lists? And in my head, the scenario for that was actually just simply that have potentially having people who weren't using Salesforce for the tied to this nonprofit. Maybe they were in like a satellite location or they were like a partner organization, but they weren't Salesforce users, but they were connected to Slack, to that nonprofit customer. So essentially, it's like, well, how can they potentially handle their tasks in Slack, but then pass those changes through to Salesforce? And I thought that might be a scenario that a nonprofit would come up with. So I started building out an idea for a solution. And this is where we come up to this side here before we get into the demo. So the approach to integrating the Slack lists, and the way I've built it is, it's sort of a half and half approach in terms of complexity. So some of it is really basic, and some of it is a bit more complex. It depends on your comfortability with code in there. So how to get this integration to work fully from this demo, what you'll need is a combination of Slack workflows, flows, and a bit of Apex. So the Slack workflows, I use 3 workflows, and 2 of which handle the sync changes from Salesforce to Slack or Slack to Salesforce. And then 1 is there for to allow you to create the Slack list item in Slack when a task is created in Salesforce. And part of the reason for that is because I've had challenges with particularly dates in terms of getting them to convert properly from Salesforce to Slack when pushing out. So I made the executive decision during this phase of the building and the testing. This is something I'm doing on my own time, so it's not something I'm doing or not working on for a project. So I'm just doing this on my own time as and when permits. So in this case, a task is created in Salesforce, and you then get a message in Slack, which you'll see shortly in the demo, which then asks you to create the list item inside of Slack. You'd also have to create a Slack webhook. In this case, the webhook is essentially used to pass the information from Salesforce into Slack and on that side. It's essentially so the Slack webhook is to call a workflow. And basically what it does is use in the invocable action, you trigger that webhook by giving it an endpoint URL, which you will see in this session as we go forward into the demo. So this creates a framework for managing tasks and Slack lists in Salesforce. And as an important note in there, or if you're going to do this, it is important that you store the Slack list and Slack list item IDs in Salesforce somewhere. Again, you'll see how I'm doing that in this demo. So this is kind of just some high-level talking points for this, because these IDs are used to create and update tasks in Salesforce based on Slack changes on there. And again, you'll see how this works as you go into our demo, which you're just about to go into now. So let's pivot over to Salesforce and we'll have a look at what we're doing. So this is my Slack Manager app. Again, this has been a bit of a big piece that I've kind of been working through over time for the last couple of years, as and when time permits, and I've got ideas or things I want to try and stuff like this. So this is basically been a long-term work in progress. Now, in here, I've got an object here called Slack lists, and the idea here is basically when you create a Slack list, you create a Slack list record in Salesforce as well, and you map over some information. The information that we're mapping over here is the Slack list item ID, the Slack list your Slack list URL, not to be confused with the Slack list item URL. It appears in a different location. I've got a description here. And then I've also got my triggered down webhook for create and my triggered down webhook for update. And these are used to trigger the workflow. And these URLs here are essentially what's used in the workflow in there. And you can see there are some differences, but these are pushed through. So how this works is if I want to create a task in Salesforce, and then push it through into Slack, I can do so by coming into new tasks. And let's just do SF to Slack list demo. And I'm just going to put this as yeurDreamin25. And I'm going to pass some information in here. Now, as mentioned, because of the way that the data are working, this does have to be replicated in Slack, unfortunately. Is my goal in the long term to change that so it can be fully automated on there, but we'll do this. So I'll put this as a high priority. And you can see here as well, we've got the Slack list item ID, Slack list item URL, and the Slack person. These are fields that are populated from the sync from Slack into Salesforce. And these are then used to kind of control the two-way syncing. So let's create this task, and I'm going to just save this in there. And you can see I've created this task in there. And if we now move over to Slack, you'll see here I've got a message in my Slack list updates channel where I've got a message here. I need to create the Slack list item. So if I click on that button, you'll see here I've got the form to pop in. So I'm going to assign this to me, 21st of March, and then we're going to set this to a high priority. And we're going to save this. I'm not going to add anything in the comments or anything like that. So we'll now just submit this. You'll see that's now changed to Mark. Click the link. And if I go to my list, you'll see here I've got the list task there. If I go back over into my Slack list task, you can see here it's populated with my Slack person, which is the ID for the individual, the Slack list item ID, and the Slack list item URL. So these fields have all been populated. Now, what I can do here is I can actually put in and say this is in progress, and I can make a change to this. Let's just reload that. Because sometimes it does that. So let's just save that and then save. So you can see I've changed this to in progress. And if I go back into Slack, you can see it's now changed to in progress. And likewise, I can change, okay, let's just say I've actually got the priority wrong. I'm going to change it to high to normal. And I'm going to add in, this is a comment. And then put that in there. So you can see I've made those changes to the comments on there. Now, if I go back to my task in Salesforce and do a hard refresh on here, you'll see it's changed from normal priority and it's added in the comment. So you can see there how I was able to create the task in Salesforce and I'm able to push in changes up and down across. So changes from Slack into Salesforce and changes from Salesforce into Slack. Likewise, if I want to create the task in Slack, so I'm just going to do Slack list to SF demo YD25. And I'm now going to assign this to me. And I'm going to give it a date of the 21st as well. So now if I go back into my test list, you should now see that there are two tasks there. I've got my Slack list SF demo, which is the one I set up there. And you can see there that was created by the Slack integration user, which is a custom user I've added to kind of control the management of the task creation and updating. So I've used this as its own user. So you can see that I've made those changes. And likewise, again, if I want to change this to in progress and save, and then go back into Slack, this will change to in progress, or it should change to in progress. So there we go. Just took a while. And I can also, again, put another comment in there. So you can see here fairly seamlessly, I am actually putting in these changes. So if I go back to here and just refresh that, you can see those are coming. And likewise, if I want to complete this task, I can complete it in Salesforce, and this will change to completed in a moment. There you go. And likewise, if I want to see it completed in there, and then go back to my task in Salesforce, because it's open, so you can see those tasks are complete because those are gone from the list. But if I was to go into my tasks here, and you will then see this Slack list one is completed. So that's the Slack list one that's completed, as was the SF the Slack list demo on there. So you can see how that was working. You can also see, if I go here, you can see there's messages going back and forth. And there's messages coming into the Slack list updates channel, which basically tells you those changes. And those ones I've put in just to kind of show you basically what changes are being made and being synced. And these are populated basically when a change comes in from Salesforce. It populates these information and then just goes Salesforce to Slack sync test this. It posts a message to say these are the changes that Salesforce made for this task. On the automation side, I'll show you this before I show you the flows on there. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I've got my Salesforce Slack list create items. So what this does is it triggers from the webhook. And if I open this up, you'll see here. So it triggers from the webhook, and you can see there. And you can see there, that's the webhook URL that we did before. So this is for the used on the creation. It sends a message to the channel. You click on that and you see that configures, and it runs a flow to pass in some details on there. Likewise, I've got this one for the sync Slack list to Salesforce item. So this runs when a Slack list item is updated. It just then runs a flow, which passes the details across. So likewise, if I click on here and then click on the flow, you can see the information is passing across. And it does pass the date, because the date does work from Slack to Salesforce. It doesn't work properly for Salesforce to Slack, as I mentioned. So, but this passes that information across. And then likewise, I have a one in here for the Salesforce the Slack task. So it runs a flow. So it triggers a webhook. It runs a flow to pass in the information. And you can see here, it updates the list item at the end, and you can see it doesn't do the date because the issue I mentioned with the date as well. And there's also some chance with the ID as well. So you can see this is basically passing those stuff back. So essentially you've got 3 workflows per list, which sounds like quite a bit, but that is because there's not really a decision element as such in Slack workflows. Now, if I go back into here, and we've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll go through a bit of the flows on here. So the 4 main flows that are working in here are this one, which runs on the creation. This basically is what is run to create to trigger the webhook to create the Slack list item, allow you to create the Slack list item via that form which you saw before. So this flow just grabs the related Slack list, checks if it's been found. But this is what you use on the task. So if the Slack list is not related, if the task is not related to a Slack list, the flow ends. But if it is related to a Slack list, and then it will grab the assigned Slack user, which you can see there, and you can then go into this webhook. So this is my invocable Apex action. And you can see here it uses the endpoint, which uses the trigger down webhook, the create one. And it passes a bunch of information in there, such as the activity ID, the description. It does pass down the due date, but obviously we mentioned that doesn't work. And it does pass down the priority, the status, and the subject on there. Likewise, I've got one for update, which will run, and this runs in an async path, but it'll set some information, gets to who the last modified user was, checks if it should change to Salesforce. So basically, for it to not sync, it shouldn't be ran if it's the Slack integration user, and that is because that Slack integration user is the one that's used for the automation. So essentially, it's expecting you to make a change as a user, such as myself or somebody who's not the integration user, to allow it to push those changes into Slack. If it does, it'll grab the Slack list and then it'll trigger the webhook again, but uses the update endpoint URL, and in that information, it then will you see there runs a flow to grab some information on there. And that's not a flow we're showing on this one. That flow essentially just grabs the information of that Slack list item and then puts that into Slack. We've got this one here as well, which is an auto launch flow, which is run from the workflows, which basically just does a various amount of steps. It'll, for example, grabbing the Slack list, the Slack user, and then checking if the user was found. And if the user wasn't found, it'll assign the user as the default user. So grab that and then assign it here. And if the user was found, it'll assign that there. And basically all it does is go, right, does the user ID in there, does it equal the user that was found? And what you can see here is it grabs it, so by the Slack user ID equals the person variable from the Slack workflow. And then it sets the task values. And again, these are what's coming in from the Slack workflow, and it pushes all of this information in to the task in Salesforce. And that creates the Salesforce task from the Slack list. And then there's this one here, which syncs the Slack list item. This runs on those changes. So this also accounts for ones where a Slack list item is changed inside of Slack. So it'll run and go, yeah, is the subject included? Yeah, if there's not a subject, it doesn't run. And then it'll grab the Slack list and Slack list item task as well. So you can see that if it doesn't find a task, it'll go down the tree where it creates the Slack list. So it creates the task for the Slack list item, and that'll run down there. If there is one found, it'll check to see if the assignee's been changed, and then it'll run through those steps which you saw before in the other flow, and then it updates the Slack list item at the end by using the assignment element and then an update task element. So there is quite a bit going on there, and I'm using a combination of flows in there. And these are the four main flows that I use to trigger update the sync back and forth on that one. So you saw there was a trigger for creating the task inside of Slack. There was one to update it, and likewise there's one to create the Salesforce task from the Slack item, and then one to sync the Slack list item changes into Salesforce. So that is the integration at a whistle-stop tour. And as mentioned, one of the things I do want to kind of work on is this bit around the dates, because the date issue is the blocker for making this fully automated. And I'm hoping to try and get that solved sometime within the next year. if I can. And that is just because the way the Salesforce flow passes out the date does not align with how the Slack webhook receives it. So there has to be essentially a step to try and convert it, which I need to figure out and how that will work over time on that in that front. So that is an overview of the demo and the overview of how the integration works. This is something that you could probably quite easily do yourself. I have, obviously, mentioned there is an invocable Apex action and a Slack webhook that is being created, and those have not been showed in today's session. I will be looking at potentially doing a longer form post, some posts, maybe in a bit of a series about setting this up, so that you can see how this works in practice on yourself. So that's basically the demo and the integration as you can see it. So I do want to say a big thank you for attending today's session. And as we begin to wrap up, I do want to share some resources with you that you can access, which will give you some insight onto kind of how this journey has gone. And you'll be able to get access to the slides for today's session on there for viewing, and you'll also be able to get access to some other material as well. Again, I do want to really highlight about the Q&A. On that resources sheet that you'll get access to from the QR code, there is that Google form on there. And again, I'll be looking to answer questions in a LinkedIn post, a LinkedIn blog, sometime in the next coming weeks. So if you are happy for me to tag you in that to say that you've asked the question, please just do let me know via the Q&A form on there. Speaking of the resources, if you want to use this QR code, you can scan that and you'll get access to the resources. In there is a mixture of resources on there about the Slack integration side of things and how that works. There'll also be more links coming at a future date. So if something you want to keep an eye on, feel free to grab this and bookmark this, and you'll be able to see when I say release posts on this in future dates. Inside that as well, you'll also see some LinkedIn posts, which actually covers kind of my journey in kind of working on this integration in the initial stages of the work that I was doing on this. So you'll be able to see that there. So there's quite a few resources available on that. So I'll give you another few seconds just to scan that, and then we'll wrap up on today's session. Great. So I want to say a big thank you as we wrap up for joining. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and I hope you found it beneficial and helpful to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, or come and find me on socials, and let's engage and talk about this further. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to fill in that Google form. But I do really hope that you found the session useful and helpful. So thank you again for joining, and I hope to see you again soon.